Welcome to the Head Trash Show. My name is Alexia Leachman and I'm the founder of Head Trash, home to the new and unique head trash clearance method that removes unwanted negative thoughts, feelings and emotions quickly and effectively so that you can achieve clarity, confidence and contentment in your life. My goal with this podcast is to teach you how to create some headspace by helping you to unpick what's blocking you and sharing some tips and how-tos for clearing it. Tune in every week as I share simple strategies to help you to achieve confidence and clarity in your life and business. To find out how to clear your head trash quickly and effectively using our unique method, pop over to headtrash.com to get our free download and subscribe for our free head trash clearance updates. And now for the show. Hello and welcome back to the Head Trash Show. This is me, your host, Alexia Leachman. Now, on today's show, I'm going to be talking about anger. So, are you an angry person? Do you think that you're an angry person? What is anger? What does anger look like? Are you surrounded by angry people? Does anger feature a lot in your life? These are all really interesting questions, and I think the first place to start is really getting a handle on what anger is. And the reason I say that is because I was observing a LinkedIn conversation a few weeks ago, which kind of inspired the show, to be honest, because somebody had put out a question to his group saying, somebody has just accused me of being a very angry person and they get that through my updates. But I don't think I'm an angry person. And so the question he asked the group was, is it possible that you can be angry without knowing it? And I think that's a really interesting question. Because certainly when I observe other people's social media updates, I can definitely pick up tinges of anger in what they're saying and how they're saying what they're saying. But sure, I can definitely see how that person might not, on the face of it, think that they're an angry person because they're not shouting, they're not waving their hands in the air, they're not screaming, and that is very much the idea of anger that we have. But what was more interesting was the whole debate that this kicked off within this LinkedIn group. And it was very heated with lots of views. And I thought this is a fascinating subject area. The idea that somebody can be angry without knowing it. And therefore, what is anger? What is going on really when we're angry? So I thought the best thing for me to do was to find an anger expert. And that is who I've got on the show today. I've got Julian Hall on the show today. And he is... his business is called The Calm People, and he helps people with emotional resilience, but his area of specialism is anger. And so I thought it'd be great to get him on because he could maybe help me to understand a little bit more about what is happening with anger and maybe understand a little bit more about what else is going on beneath the surface. What are the other emotions that are tied into anger that maybe we're denying and suppressing, which is why anger kind of pops out without us wanting it to, in a kind of uncontrolled way. What are those other ways that anger can seep into our lives? So that's what I talk about with Julian. We try and get a grip on what anger is. What does it look like? How can it seep into our lives without us realising, but maybe in a way that other people can spot really easily? But also, what are the other emotions and feelings that are tied in with anger that maybe anger is masking, that we're not really, admitting to ourselves, or we're denying and suppressing? So that is the kind of stuff that Julian is going to help me explore during this chat. So without further whittering on from me, let me hand over to the time that I spoke to Julian all about anger. So welcome, Julian. Welcome to the Head Trash Show.
Hi.
Thank you for coming on board. Now, Julian is an anger expert and specialises in helping people with emotional resilience, but particularly anger. Is that right, Julian?
That's absolutely right, yes. I deal with emotional resilience, which is stress, conflict, self-esteem, but I trained in and I specialise in anger management. And I just realised a long, long time ago that everything we do to help people who have an unhealthy relationship with anger actually applies to pretty much everybody else as well. So we're involved in spreading the word and helping as many people as possible with it.
Now, when it comes to sort of being an anger expert, does that mean that once upon a time you used to be really angry?
That's a really, really good question, and it's not an uncommon one either. The answer, in all honesty, is not really. And I say not really simply because when I went to train in anger management, I went to train it because I was really, really interested in it, and I was really interested in helping people. And I went in there with a mindset that said that I'm not really angry. I'm just going to help loads of people who are angry. What I did know about myself was that I absolutely hate conflict. I'm very good at negotiating because I don't like conflict, and I'm very good at helping other people with conflict. What I didn't realise before I went into my training was that actually I have my own particular relationship with anger, and I've had plenty of anger in my life, and I've been involved in some very angry relationships, and I can look back on my life and say that there's plenty of relationships early on in my life, my late teenage years, that went by and I lost them simply because of my own lack of self-esteem and my own inability to deal with conflict. So I guess in a roundabout way what I'm saying is, do I do anger? Yes. Do I do it in my own way? Yes. Am I outwardly angry, and do I become unhealthily angry these days? No. And I spend my life helping people be healthy in their anger.
So what was it about anger particularly that you were drawn to? Why did you want to help angry people?
You know what? I think that's because they're the most obvious people who wear their problems on their sleeve. That's why. So, and what I mean by that is that I probably wasn't emotionally intelligent enough to recognise that there's a whole range of other people out there who've got other issues as well. For instance, the low self-esteemers that are becoming angry, or the people who are just being abused inside their homes, who aren't allowed to be angry, but deep down really, really are. So for me, really, it was just a case of that seemed the most obvious emotion to focus in on. And I was lucky enough to be able to link up with the British Association of Anger Management. They trained me, and I worked with them for 3 or 4 years as well.
Right, okay. So it's kind of like the beginning of your own emotional journey where you were sort of becoming more savvy about emotions and being more self-aware, and that's where you started.
You've got it, absolutely. And it's almost an emotional awareness journey for me. Bearing in mind that if 5.5, 6 years ago you'd have said to me, are you emotionally intelligent? I'd have said, yes, of course I am. And I'd probably be able to give you lots of evidence to suggest that I was as well. But I clearly wasn't as emotionally intelligent as I thought I was. And hopefully I'm a little bit more in tune with myself than I was before then.
Yes, and believe me, I'm sitting here as somebody who started Head Trash, and I do have plenty of head trash, but I have a lot less now than I used to have. And I think for all of us, it's a journey, isn't it? We get drawn to the kind of work that on some level we need ourselves and we benefit from. We pass on our learnings with others as we go along the journey. Yeah,
you've got it. And you know what? If you find an expert in any field who actually tells you that they are perfect and they are the perfect exponent of everything they do, then as far as I'm concerned, they're lying.
Yeah.
I'm a work in progress. Do I get angry? Yes. Do I use my own tools to help me when I do? Absolutely, because I believe in what I do. But I'm not perfect, and I'm on my own journey like everybody else.
Yeah. So when it comes to angry people then, there's some really obvious telltale signs that you can spot an angry person, but what are the less obvious telltale signs that we might that reveal that we're dealing with an angry person?
Okay, well, I guess let's get a couple of things straight first of all, because whenever we talk, particularly about anger management, particularly because of things like the films and the series that's on there and on I think CBS at the moment with Charlie Sheen, is that a lot of people have a fairly stereotypical idea of anger, which is what they think is that there's people out there on the street shouting, screaming, being violent, throwing things around. And really that's probably only about 10% of the people that I work with. Or to put it another way, most people are able to do that and have done that in their lives, but they only express themselves in that way in about 10% of situations. Right. Okay. Now the rest of us, and if you like, the rest of us are now bumbling along, being passive aggressive, and that is where I pretend that I'm not angry, and I pretend I'm not angry with you, and I'm trying to fool myself that I'm not angry, and I'm trying to fool you that I'm not angry, but actually I can't help but leak the truth.
Yeah.
And so it might go something like, Alexia, don't worry, I'm not angry with you. It's not a problem, but I will get my revenge. Okay, and I'm going to get my revenge by being sarcastic towards you. When your back's turned, I'll stab you in the back. I'll have those coffee pot conversations with your colleagues where I'll tell them all how horrible you've been to me and how unfair you are to me. Things like that. If I'm in a relationship with you, I'll withhold my affection, and if I'm in a working relationship with you, I'll probably withhold my support at some point as well. And all the time I'm doing that, but I'm trying to tell you that I'm not angry and everything's okay and I'm perfect and I'm sorted and I'm wonderful. So these things come out, and the most obvious sign of someone being angry is sarcasm.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean that when someone's being sarcastic that they're angry, but people use sarcasm as one of their angry tools. So when someone's sarcastic, you tend to have to ask yourself, so are they genuinely being humorous, or are they trying to make a point? Are they having a dig at me? And if they're having a dig, then there's a problem between you and me, and we need to sort it out.
So you mentioned some other behaviours there. So sort of people I guess a bit of dishonesty and some lying and maybe some being judgmental or critical, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Is
absolutely.
That's the kind of thing that you're talking about, is
absolutely
anger
spot on.
showing up in that way.
Yeah, you've got it absolutely spot on. The judgments and the criticisms, they are a huge part of being angry. And the dishonesty, passive aggression is a very, very dishonest form of anger. It's actually manipulative, it's deceitful, because I'm not brave enough or honest enough to say, I'm angry with you, we need to talk about this. But I can't not express it. So I have to let it out somewhere, and that's why it ends up doing. And we have a lot of issues that society in general doesn't really want to recognise anger. The workplace is even more repressed when it comes to anger, and the sort of stereotypical workplace is one where they want everybody to be honest, but they don't want them to be angry, because anger is too borderline bullying, and there's bullying and harassment procedures in place, and everybody's really worried about that. So my stereotypical client might be somebody who is really stressed, really frustrated, really angry at work, but they can't express it. So they take it all home with them, and then you only need a tiny, tiny little thing to happen, and they act out at home. And they act out at home, they abuse the people that they would say they love the most. My reaction to that is actually, you're not abusing the people who love you, who you love the most. You're abusing the people who love you the most, because they're the ones who are prepared to put up with it.
Yeah. And it's when you suppress something like that you just don't have the control as to when and where it pops out. So then it's more likely to pop out in an environment where you feel safer, i.e. at home.
Yes.
Or it seeps out in these other little surprising ways, such as the digs, the sarcasm, and you don't, again, feel like you've got control over that either, probably at the moment.
Yeah,
do you?
absolutely spot on. And that safety thing is really interesting. Again, if I'm stereotyping, and the majority of my clients aren't stereotypical, but if you stereotype it as the person who acts out at home when they get home from work, you're absolutely right, because they feel safe to do so. But in doing so, they make the other people who are with them feel unsafe.
Yeah.
And that's the real irony that goes there, is they feel safe enough to act out, but nobody else is safe around them.
Yeah.
So that's really difficult for them. And the other thing we've touched on there is the suppression of feelings. So classically, I might express anger, but the fact of the matter is there's chances are there's other feelings going on underneath, and we have a whole set of other feelings, including feeling hurt, feeling sad, and feeling scared and feeling shameful. But particularly the hurt, the scared, and the sadness are traditionally emotions or feelings that we find it uncomfortable expressing, and that we feel that if we express them to other people, we will feel vulnerable. And we don't like to make ourselves vulnerable, so instead we go on the attack and we show our anger. So if you know someone who's angry, you might want to ask yourself, actually, are they really angry, or are they really, really hurt? Are they feeling really, really vulnerable, and that's the only way that they can express themselves.
And the other thing is, that fear of expressing the anger, because some people might feel that if they really do, they can't control how they express it. So when it comes out, it is a little bit scary. They might sort of shout, lose their rag a bit, get slightly emotional, lose a little bit of control. So they prefer to keep a lid on it, rather than somebody that can just express anger in a calm way.
Yeah.
Because you need to have cleared a lot of that inner work to be able to express yourself in an angry way, but in a calm way as well.
Absolutely, yes. And we broadly would break our clients into two halves. We either have people who come to us who are completely overwhelmed by their emotions, so they're getting angry all the time, and they might be internally angry, so there's a lot of tears and things like that, or they might be screaming and shouting angry. But actually most of my clients who come to me, because we have this wonderful English repressed society that we live in, are actually stuck in what we call our head. In other words, we're being logical, rational. We can debate things to the nth degree, but we will never admit that we're angry, because to do so is to admit that we have feelings. And those are the people who have almost the most revelatory experiences when they do work with us, because they start to be able to understand that they do have feelings, and that those feelings are part of them. They can exist within them, and they can express them in a healthy way without letting their guard down, without making themselves vulnerable, and without losing respect.
And there's an interesting debate I saw on LinkedIn recently about, where somebody said that one of their contacts on LinkedIn said that they appear to be quite an angry person based on their LinkedIn updates. And as far as they were concerned, they weren't angry. And that, that throws up a very interesting dimension to, the fact that we live our lives a lot on social media. We put a lot of updates out on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. And as somebody that works with people's emotions, I can spot an angry update or somebody that's clearly got something bubbling underneath the surface very easily in an update. And yet, it's this passive aggressive, it's this sort of bubbling anger when you can see somebody that's constantly whining, always being negative, lots of use of exclamation marks when they just whatever, that kind of venting, constantly frustrating comments or whatever it is. For me, I just see that and think, God, you're so angry. I don't know. Have you got any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, you've summed it up perfectly, Alexia. That's exactly what they're doing. The only thing I would add to that is that because it's the written media, we find it really, really difficult to interpret. So we can see that when you say, that's really quite angry language and the way they're expressing it. But of course, the thing about things like LinkedIn updates, Facebook updates, they're lost in a sea of a huge number of other updates. So we find ourselves needing to be ever more expressive just to get ourselves noticed. So people become more judgmental and more critical, and they become more outlandish in the things that they say. So it may well actually be that person who was quite offended to be suggested that they were quite angry based upon their LinkedIn updates actually genuinely thinks and actually genuinely isn't a very angry person. They've just thought that that's the only way they're going to get noticed. But at the same time, it's easy to see how people would think that they are very, very angry. The other issue, of course, is the other side of it, which is that people express themselves like that, but they are in complete denial, and they don't think that they're angry, and they just think that's the way you express yourself, and that's the way to get on, because they're in a pattern where they've learned that that's how they get their needs met, that's how they get respect, that's how they get attention, that's how they get appreciated and validated, and they think if they can get all those things, particularly on social network like Facebook, Twitter or LinkedIn, then actually that's an appropriate way to behave, when it isn't really that appropriate, but they're getting their needs met that way, so they'll keep on doing it.
And I guess it goes back a bit to the fact that when people have an idea about what being angry looks like, it's shouting, it's waving your hands in the air, it's raising your voice, whereas actually there's a lot more beneath the surface, and there's a lot, like you described at the beginning, there's lots of other ways you can behave that demonstrate that there's some anger there that needs to be resolved, that's not being managed healthily. And maybe people don't really have a label for that. They don't realise that actually is anger, it needs to be healed in them.
Absolutely. And again, it might not just be anger, it might be hurt as well, and it might be sadness. And I can't remember the numbers, but I remember many times in my late teenage years where I was attracted to girls, and then when I got to know them, I came up against this barrier of aggression. It was almost they held their self-esteem and their issues in front of them as a way of stopping you getting close to them. And of course it did stop me getting close to them, so we didn't have a relationship anymore, and that there was anger and there was hurt and there was sadness there, and they were just using it as a way of stay away from me. Or if you come any further, you're going to have to be able to deal with someone who feels fairly damaged and who's going to act out a lot at you. And I think I was emotionally intelligent at that point in my life to realise that I didn't even want to go there. But other people would. and then you end up in dysfunctional relationships.
So you mentioned some other emotions that might be going on that maybe contribute to those feelings of anger. But what else might be going on? If we were going to try and break anger down a bit and understand a little bit about what might cause anger, or what, anger is the sort of the result of something else that's going on. What might be going on for people that's bringing out that anger for them?
Okay, so I guess that we break down into various different sections for people to understand what's triggering them into their anger. And the first one we ever deal with is stress straight away. And I guess most people listening to this understand that they have a relationship between their stress levels and how likely they are to get angry. So I know exactly what it is with me, is that I've got a fairly long fuse, but if I'm on a really, really bad day and things aren't going well for me and I'm on deadlines and I'm stretched and I'm not sure whether I'm going to get enough money in this month, it's a whole lot easier for me to have an emotional reaction towards almost anything that someone says than it would be if the world is all going right and everything's fantastic and I'm chilled and I'm calm. So we think of stress as the fuel that anger needs. And if we can deal with that first of all, what we're already doing is start to reduce the number of occasions when people might want to become unhealthily angry, and start to help them work out, actually, am I really angry here or am I just stressed? And stress, of course, when we get down to it, is about fear, and fear is I'm scared. So we're back down to our core feelings, is that I'm really, really scared right now, but maybe I find it easier to suggest that I'm angry than to actually express my vulnerability and deal with my fear.
Right.
So stress is the first one. And then for me, the next biggest subject is our self-esteem. It's a huge, huge issue. And most of the anger that I see around there is caused by low self-esteem. And we tend to break that down into two subject areas. We've got negative core beliefs. An example of a classic negative core belief for me would be, I at my core, I used to think that I was useless. I will spend an inordinate amount of effort trying to prove and demonstrate that I'm not useless, but then my wife only needs to make one small throwaway remark that she thought was perfectly innocent, and I can start a row with her that is something along the lines of, what, you think I'm useless, don't you?
Yeah.
So it's very, very easy, if we have these negative core beliefs amongst us, to be very sensitive and take things personally. We call that taking personally. And then the other side is an awful lot of stuff that you mentioned about the updates on Facebook and LinkedIn, is this need. We find people getting angry because people don't respect them, people don't listen to them, people don't validate them, people don't love them, and those are our core emotional needs. But as a society, we are beginning to ask people to, we're not. As a society, we're beginning to develop a habit where we expect other people to meet our needs for us. In other words, I demand that you listen to me, I demand that you respect me, and when I don't think you're listening to me and you don't respect me, then I get angry. Rather than learning that I am worthy of respect and learning to respect myself, which means, of course, I don't need anybody else to respect me at all, and I avoid a huge amount of conflict once I can get into that solid but difficult to achieve mindset.
Well, with the head trasher that we do, we're able to sort of neutralise those needs as well by, once you can neutralise the need, suddenly if somebody stops listening to you, then you're just not bothered. You kind of, it doesn't trigger you. If you can get rid of your own personal triggers, then there's less that can make you angry, and it could be chaotic around you, people being incredibly disrespectful and rude, and because you've erased those personal triggers, it just doesn't affect you in the way that it used to, and you're able to remain much calmer, and therefore your stress levels are much lower.
Exactly, yes. And you don't emotionally react to everything around you, which means that you can now get on with what you're doing and do your job in a really, really focused and needful way and a meaningful way. And absolutely, and spot on. So we've got those, and then there's something else we deal with our clients, which is the subject of shame, which we could probably spend a whole hour discussing that alone. So I'll just try and summarise it really, really briefly, but very, very simply put, shame is, to put it a different way, if I'm human, I make mistakes, and when I make a mistake, I know I've made a mistake, and I go, oops, I've made a mistake, and I move on. You know, hopefully I learn from the mistake, but what I am able to do is let go of it and move on. People who've had particularly painful experiences or upbringings that have reinforced shameful experiences for them will be carrying shame around with them. And of course, when they make a mistake, they don't go, oops, I made a mistake. They go, oops, I am a mistake.
Right.
So it's a feeling that they are a bad person, and in some cases they don't feel they should have been born, and that they're a mistake, and that they're a trouble and a cause to society, and things like that. And there's more people out there who feel that way than you might imagine. And that sort of anger, if someone gets close to you thinking they're going to guess what their shameful secret is, then they will become angry very, very quickly, and it can be a really nasty, aggressive form of anger. But if they internalize it, they'll hurt themselves instead. So shame is a deep problem, and classically is associated with the sort of secrets that we really don't want to tell people, and we want to hide. And whilst again it's not an absolute badge of shame, but anybody who's an absolute perfectionist in everything that they do, it's possible they're trying to hide a guilty secret. And we help people deal with that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you've got the criticisms and the judgments is the main other subject we would cover in terms of what triggers people and how it sort of generates itself in people. You mentioned those earlier. So my criticisms and my judgments of other people tend to tell me an awful lot more about myself than they actually do about the person I'm criticising, and that's classic Jungian psychology, and it comes from something called the shadow. But put simply, when I'm criticising somebody, the chances are they are displaying a behaviour or a personality trait that I actually know is mine, but I don't like it in myself.
You're denying it in yourself.
You've got it. Denying, hiding and repressing. And I find it difficult to get that feedback by watching somebody else who's perfectly capable of doing that. So instead of saying, why are they allowed to behave like that when I don't allow myself to behave like that? Instead, I judge and I criticise them, and I get very angry with them. And that's the same methodology inside us that attracts us to people who've got all the personality traits that we either admire and would like to have, or that have the same ones that we admire in ourselves. So we take people through a process of unpicking that and helping them start to own the parts themselves and just allow themselves to be human and take the pressure off themselves. Interestingly, the people who are the most angry and the most judgmental and the most critical are often the ones that are the most capable of putting themselves under the most pressure and the most judgmental and critical of themselves as well.
So does that make them higher achievers, do you think?
It very often
Typically?
does, yeah. Yeah, it very often does. A large number of my clients are what I would call low self-esteem or high achievers. And these are people who will have driven themselves for years in their careers, and they've achieved a huge amount. And every time they've achieved something and they've had the accolades and they've had the feedback and they've had the people saying, aren't you fantastic, aren't you magnificent, that really great feeling lasts for a little while, and then of course it goes, and they need it topping up. So they've got to go on and achieve something else.
Right.
You know, now that doesn't mean that if you're a balanced human being you're not going to achieve anything, but there's an awful lot of high achievers out there that are doing it because they need the feedback.
But it's interesting though, did some of those high achievers, do they maybe shy away from getting rid of that fear because that is what's driving them, and maybe they worry that if they get rid of that, then they're not going to drive themselves as much and they'll just settle and be okay with where they're at and place of acceptance.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, and one of the classic questions I might get asked as these things start to crystallise with people, they say, "So hold on, if I get rid of my fear and I get rid of my anger, I'm no longer going to be successful." You know, and I have to say, well, are you capable of working hard? Yes, you've done that all your life. Yeah, okay. Have you got skills and experience and everything else? Yes, okay. So the chances are actually you've been successful in spite of the fact that you've been scared, not because you've been scared. But people want to hold on to it because they're worried. Yeah. They're worried they might lose everything.
But I've had some conversations with some reasonably well-known sort of performing artists around this and looking to help them get over their emotional pain. And I've had, one or two sort of back out because it's like, well, no, that's what's given me my top-selling album is me writing about all my pain. And if you clear it, then that's what makes the artist, and actually I need to keep my pain because that's what's giving me my livelihood right now, kind of thing. Yeah, and they don't want to get rid of it because those people that are happy, completely fulfilled and happy and accepting, I just, they don't feel the need to go out and seek a lot of those things, because a lot of those things maybe are driven by their material needs and all that kind of stuff, which is tied to an emotional need. And actually, you know, when people are really happy, they don't need a lot. They can just live a very simple life, and suddenly it throws into question everything that they've built for themselves, doesn't it?
That's right, absolutely. And it's interesting, because when we get into that discussion with people, because, you know, fundamentally it could be people sitting there now listening to this thinking, I'm a high achiever, you know, I want that bigger house, I want that nicer car, I want those material things. Does that mean that if I actually deal with my anger issues, I'm going to lose all those? And the answer actually is no. And the example I'll give you is, I've got a picture on the screensaver of my computer, which is a huge, great big yacht, okay, moored in the Mediterranean. And that is my dream boat. That is what I would like to save up for. And when I retire, I'd like to buy that boat, and I'd like to go off around the Mediterranean for a couple of years, you know, eating fine food and drinking fine wine, you know, living the dream. But what I know is that if I never ever achieve that, I won't be unhappy. And also, if I do achieve it, I won't be any happier than I am now. Okay, but I've still got that dream. I've still got that thing that I'd like to have, because it would be a nice thing to have. But if I never had it, I wouldn't be unhappy. And because I've begun to realise that the material things don't make me happy. Being happy makes me happy. And really, after that, nothing else is that important.
Well, this is absolutely fascinating. But what I want to move on to next is, you know, how do you help people? We've touched on some of this already, but in terms of helping people to move on from this anger, what are some of the, you know, the sort of natural steps that you'd start with somebody to sort of help them to sort of get over their anger issues?
Okay. Well, in broadly simple terms, we would break down anything we do with people into 3 subject areas. One of it would be actually it's the largest area, and it's almost everything that you and I have just talked about. It's learning to live with myself, learning to understand myself, learning to actually like myself, and grow that self-esteem and that appreciation that I don't have to judge and criticize everybody, and starting to allow myself to be human again. So, you know, all that stuff that goes on. We then also, quite scarily for some people, but it doesn't have to be, start to talk about feelings, because we help people understand that they can have a vocabulary for their feelings that allows them to express themselves. And then we move into actually being able to express feelings in a healthy way, and actually understanding that when I'm hurt, I'm going to tell you that I'm hurt. I'm not going to tell you that I'm angry. So being honest about my feelings as well. And then the final stage is we help people sort of develop a process for examining the stuff that's gone on in their life already, and working out what impact the past is beginning to have on the present. Because there's no doubt that if we've had traumatic incidences and issues going on in our life and in our early developmental years, then those things are likely to be brought into our life now, and they can hijack the present, and they can cause us to have emotional issues, and they can cause us to have unhealthy relationships. So it's broadly those 3 areas. Now, whilst we're doing that, as we do it, we then give people a whole set of tips and strategies and tools to help them along the way. And I guess if you were to ask me the 2 things that I would do if I was not going to go on an anger management course, what would I do? What would I do? I'd attack my stress first of all. Okay, that is the first thing I would attack it. Yeah, in
interesting
terms of
choice of words.
yeah, it is, isn't it? I guess. But I'd first of all acknowledge that I am stressed. I'd work out what it is that I'm scared of, and I'd start to go through a process of working out, you know, actually is living with the fear more scary than the actual event, first of all. But in terms of just dealing with my day-to-day stress, I recommend to all my clients they take a minimum of twice a day, midday and mid-afternoon, at least 5 minutes of quiet time for themselves, quiet time where they can do some breathing exercises, where they can do a relaxation exercise, and just recharge their batteries. And often for a lot of people that's all they need. And it's just a very, very good maintenance exercise that will help them through a very, very busy and stressful life. Okay. And then in terms of the anger stuff, you may have noticed whenever you've been in conflict with anybody and you've ever had an ongoing issue with anybody, you may have noticed that it takes up an awful amount of headspace, and I guess you'd call that the head trash. And we have this phrase. Well, we used to have this phrase when I was taught that anger rents space in your head. We realised actually after a while that it doesn't rent it at all, does it? It squats there.
Yeah, squats,
It doesn't pay you
Doesn't
anything.
have permission.
Exactly. It's the metaphorical equivalent of having this sort of dirty old tramp sitting in the corner, stinking and smoking a pipe. It's not nice stuff to carry around with you, but it takes up an awful lot of headspace. So we say to people, just keep a journal. And there's a lot of evidence out there that says that any tasks that requires a higher level brain function, we can't multitask. We need to concentrate on it. So if you've got anger and conflict going on, that's taking up an awful lot of your higher brain function. So sit down, write down what the problem is, write down the issue you have with the person. You don't have to be particularly healthy in it. You can just be as nasty, as horrible, as judgmental, as critical as you like, so long as you never show it to them. Okay. All right. It's the email you should never send, it's the letter you should never post, okay, or it's a journal that you keep every night. But by doing that, you write it down, you clear your head, and you allow your mind to move on to far more constructive things. And those would be the two tips that we would always give people.
Okay. And when you're working with somebody on their anger, what kind of time frame does that take for them to sort of, and I realise it's going to change for a lot of people, there isn't a fixed time, but what kind of time frame could somebody expect to get to a much better place in terms of their anger when they work with you?
I would broadly say that anything between 6 weeks and 3 months is a really good starting point. And classically, the 6 weeks we're already starting to build some better habits for them, and they're beginning to become more self-aware, and they're beginning to challenge themselves over their stress issues and their self-esteem. And then at 3 months, they're beginning to get to that level of awareness and bravery, where they're willing to sit down with people that they're angry with and talk to them about the fact that they're angry. Because if I'm going to be aggressive or I'm going to be passive aggressive, that I'm very, very clear that's the coward's way out. To sit down and actually acknowledge to you that I'm feeling hurt, or to acknowledge that I'm angry, is really a very, very brave thing to do. So people don't learn to do it overnight. So we broadly, if I do one-to-one work, I'll work with somebody for a minimum of 10 weeks. If we do a group workshop, we'll work over a weekend. So you're effectively working for 2.5 days in a very, very intense process. Now, we don't have a magic wand. You're not the finished article at the end of that weekend. So people then need to build it into their life and build the habits. And that's what then takes the 6 weeks to 3 months. Yeah. And for some people, it could take up to 2 years. It just depends on your pace of change. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating, Julian. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, if you want to find out more about your work or what you do, your online home, where can they go to find out more?
Oh, thank you. Online, we're at calmpeople.co.uk. There's a blog there where we write about a variety of subjects, so you can find all about me there. If you're interested about how it goes on in business as well, because people come to me to talk about the conflict and stress and stuff in business, I'm a columnist for Business Matters magazine. So that's an online magazine as well as a printed magazine, and I'm a columnist for them. So there's columns in there about stress and emotions in the workplace. And then come and join in with me on Twitter. I'm The Calm People on Twitter, and we're The Calm People on Facebook as well. And I think that's it. Other than LinkedIn, of course, people are welcome to come and have a look at my LinkedIn profile, and they'll find articles and the odd video there as well. So there's lots of different places you can find me and interact with me. And I'm trying to be almost as prolific as you are, Alexia, and one day maybe I'll get that way.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Julian. It's been an absolute treat. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's been great talking to you. Thank you.
So now that you've listened to Julian tell us more about anger and how it shows up in our lives, when you think about your own relationship with anger, what happens for you when you get angry? What are your trigger points? What situations make you angry and bring it out in you? Or how do you do anger? Is it the snidey, sarcastic comments? Or are you able to be very calm with your anger and tell somebody straight that you're angry? Now, what I'd like to do is, depending where you are on the anger scale, is help you to start being able to do anger in a healthy way, rather than be angry in an unhealthy way, in an explosive way, in an uncontrolled way. And so one way to start looking at that, as well as the great advice that Julian was sharing, is obviously I want to sort of help you to get over this, but using our 5-step process. And so a great place to start would be to think about what your own triggers are. So some of the things we talked about during the show were things like not being listened to or being ignored or being disrespectful, those kind of things. So if those are your triggers, then those are the things that you can start using in our 5-step process by putting those into the mantras. If you don't know what our 5-step process is, then check out previous podcasts and also head over to the Head Trash homepage where you can download for free our 5-step process to clearing your head trash. And of course, what Julian was saying during the show is that anger takes up a hell of a lot of headspace, which can prevent you from thinking clearly and sleeping well and being healthy. And so it's really important to clear out the stuff that is making you angry and ultimately enable you to be angry in a healthy, calm way and communicate your anger rather than keep it suppressed. So think about what your triggers are and start neutralising those triggers so that they're no longer trigger points for you and so that less things make you angry. This will help to reduce your stress levels too. So I think that this episode is going to be absolutely brilliantly useful to anybody that is suffering from anger on any level. If you have any questions at all about how to deal with your anger, then email me at the show at hello@headtrash.co.uk. Julian runs monthly workshops, open public workshops on stress and calm and keeping anger out of your life as well. So you can check out his website at The Calm People as well. He's on Twitter at The Calm People, so I'm sure he'll be tweeting about his next workshops as well there. I think there's one coming up in the new year. So please, if anger is something that you're struggling with, then do not hesitate to get in touch with either myself or Julian to help you to get over it, because it really doesn't have to be that way. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed the show. Now, before I go, I just want to remind you that I'm going to be doing a show very soon about unpicking your head trash. So if you're struggling with something that's going on in your head and you're not quite sure how to deal with it or what's going on or what you need to do to get rid of it, then let me know here at the show and I will unpick that on the podcast. So email me at hello@headtrash.co.uk and let me know what you're struggling with, and I will go through that on the show so you can understand a lot more clearly about what you need to do to get rid of it. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I'll join you again next week. Bye for now. You've just been listening to Alexia Leachman here on the Head Trash Show. If you enjoyed the show, I'd really appreciate you leaving a review here on iTunes. And don't forget to pop over to headtrash.com to get your copy of our free 5 Steps to Clearing Head Trash guide. Now stay tuned for upcoming episodes and more tips and how-tos for clearing your head trash and reclaiming your headspace. Until next time, bye for now.